Okay, great. So, Roger, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today. So, can you tell me about an area that you've been around and know well over the last 20 or so years?
I've lived in a town called Argyle, Texas for around 22 years now, but before that I lived in Pilot Point, which is in the same county in North Texas. So I was born and raised there, pretty much been there my whole life in that general vicinity.
Okay, very cool. And so in Argyle, did it used to kind of be wide, flat, open plains? Has there been a lot of development recently? How's it changed over the past 20 years, in your opinion?
Well, there's been a lot of development, especially it's around 30 to 40 minutes northeast of Fort Worth, which has been expanding pretty steadily for my entire life. Just kind of suburbs, like expanding upwards into areas that were previously rural. And so, yeah, that's how it's kind of been changing at a very high level.
Interesting. And so, I guess kind of before that development, then, did it used to be like a very rural space where there were a lot of kind of outdoorsy things out there? What was that kind of like?
Yeah, there's a lot of open space. Um, there's still quite a bit of farming in both towns, in both Argyle and Pilot Point, but definitely a little bit less. Particularly, there's a lot less agriculture. I feel like that's just become more consolidated into, huge farms with huge open spaces that we just don't really have anymore, since the towns have both become, at least to an extent, a little bit more developed.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, great. So, I guess in that sense, has there been any kind of, environmental changes specifically, or things to do with perhaps the weather that have changed, perhaps like rain or extensive floods or things like that?
Well, like 9 years ago in North Texas, there was like a big problem because the soil was really dry because there was like a 5 year long drought. But then in like 2015, like mid 2015, it just started raining a whole lot, and the soil became too wet to plow. So it's kind of the opposite problem. Like immediately afterwards, like very unpredictable weather patterns there have been in Dallas and North Texas broadly, which is hard for this. It's hard on the soil because it does unpredictable things to it, but it also kind of makes the animals act weird. I think I read some things about that, like they wash away and stuff.
Oh, interesting. And so, has soil erosion ever popped up in the topic of the news or things like that, or do you know anything about that?
I don't know much about soil. My family's not super into farming, but a lot of my friends are. We don't talk about the specifics.
Yeah, no worries. That's fine. And I guess just to maybe speak about a little bit more about those rain conditions, 20 years, maybe like actually 20 years ago, do you think that was a problem they also faced then? Have they kind of learned from history, or is that more of like a recent phenomenon?
In terms of the raining,
Sure, just like that kind of general environmental kind of change and stuff.
well, I don't think the weather was quite as unpredictable then as it is now. In terms of rain, I mean, I'm really just speaking about rain.
Okay. No, sure. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and maybe just my last question is to kind of think about what activities do you maybe like to do around the area now? Were you a little bit more outdoorsy as a kid?
Yeah, definitely more outdoorsy as a kid. It was just a lot easier to, go mudding and stuff. Just because there's a lot more open space, and I think just kind of in general too, like people were a little bit more lax about that kind of thing. Now everyone's kind of, a little bit more uptight. So I don't know if that has more to do with the environment or more to do with people, but
Interesting. And so, I guess just to kind of close things off, do you have any kind of like last thoughts about maybe how Argyle is developing? Do you have a specific opinion on if you like it or not? Have there been any, specific technological advances there or things like that?
there are pros and cons to everything. Kind of a pattern that I've seen with towns that get kind of hit with this expansion of the big cities like San Antonio and Dallas and Fort Worth. And also just to kind of clarify, speaking of, Argyle is kind of at the very edge of where Fort Worth is expanding to right now, so it's beginning to blow up. Pilot Point's a little bit past Argyle, so it won't reach there until it's fully done its damage in Argyle. But I would say that a kind of pattern that emerges is that a town will like try very, very hard to maintain its rural feel while at the same time building a lot of houses and a lot of subdivisions. Just kind of in your standard way, like the houses that look a whole lot like each other, like very close to each other. So like, for example, one thing in Argyle that's really annoying is that there's a lot of people now, but there's still a city ordinance against most types of businesses like drive-throughs and other things that you wouldn't normally have in a rural city. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of get like more traffic and whatnot, but also you don't get the benefit of having those things that are just kind of nice to have around, like a McDonald's.
No, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.